Okay, friends, here we are again, and we're working in the book, The Externalization of the Hierarchy, and we have completed 6 programs thus far, and today is the 17th of January, 2019, and our countdown towards 2025 is operating. If I had my way, I would be able to get through some video commentary on all of these books. I've done some of the big ones, but there's much more to do, and some of the commentaries are on Makara, and they are written out in in the normal outline form. So they are not exactly what you would call video commentaries, but one way or another, I'd like to facilitate the study of these books by offering suggestions. Of course, maybe it doesn't take the place of people being able simply to sit down, read the book, whatever, come to their own conclusions. But with what I say, also, you can come to your own conclusions very definitely. And my purpose is to help us make connections so we can thread together many similar points, or at least points which bear upon each other and might not be known to the more casual reader. I guess I've been in these books now for almost 50 years, and I'm trying to tie together the connections which do occur to me as I carefully read with you and study with you these points. Now, even though we are in the year 1939, it was a momentous year because it was the year that war was officially declared. The Tibetan is saying so much which is absolutely of importance to the modern disciple. This may have been, as I say, 80 years ago, what we're talking about here, approximately 80 years ago, but it has a seminal importance in the kind of world that we have developed over these last 40 years, approximately 80 years. It will be by May of 2019, it will be exactly 80 years. So, the powerful year 1939, the annexation, the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria has taken place. The invasion of Czechoslovakia, or should we say the walking into Czechoslovakia without battles being fought, has taken place. And the invasion of Poland, I think it was early September, is looming. So DK says, in this hour of crisis, anxiety, and suspense, just imagine what people are going through as they contemplate what might occur here. You have a Germany which is powerfully armed and against the all of the conditions of the Versailles Treaty, and these armaments have been revealed, and now it seems too late for humanity to avoid the precipitation of the last part of this great war from 1914 to 1945, too late to avoid the precipitation onto the physical plane. This is exactly what we hope to avoid now, because the precipitation of a third phase probably would be lethal to humanity as we know it, and the whole experiment of raising up a human race which can really respond to the divine plan might have to be started again, as he tells us in the original introduction to the problems of humanity, as if to emphasize the urgency. In this hour of crisis, anxiety, and suspense, it has seemed that there are certain things which you would do well to remember and certain things which you should endeavor to do. So one is to keep it in mind, and the other is the call for for action. The first thing of which I would like to remind you is that the hierarchy stands. Well, it's a very declarative statement, and as Master M has said, must we shout it in your ears, hierarchy. So those of us who are working against the prevalent tide of human consciousness, which seems at times retrogressive due to fear, we remember the hierarchy stands. And, I think we should just pause for a moment and just take that into consideration. What does that mean to us? When you stand, it's an expression of the first ray, standing in spiritual being. Maybe the sitting posture is more related to the second ray and how it achieves enlightenment. Behind all that is going on today, the same group of spiritual forces and the same elder brothers and masters are to be found as heretofore. When? What do we say? Like, as in Atlantean days? At least the principles in this war were the same in Atlantis, and that's quite amazing. So maybe some of the characters also in hierarchy are there, although they seem to have achieved in their hierarchical status in more recent times. But the same elder brothers and masters are to be found as heretofore, guiding humanity along the path of life and bringing us safely. Here the Tibetan is identifying with and as humanity, bringing us safely and satisfactorily to our present point of development. Well, certainly, the Buddha, I suppose, became the head of the hierarchy around 3000 BC, at the point of the death of Krishna, who was the Christ, who became the head of the hierarchy in around 500 BC. Anyway, this is a Wesak message, so it's about the Buddha whose festival we are celebrating, and the Christ, who expresses to us the unchanging love of God, are still with us. As in, former times, thousands of years ago, are still with us, and the hierarchy stands as a bulwark of strength between us and possible disaster. And notice, he really is identifying as humanity. Every once in a while, he is a master, of course, but he's putting himself on that level where he is expressing his solidarity not only with humanity, but as humanity. Masters are still members of the human race. Maybe with Chohans you can question it. They are no longer men as are the masters. It says, I think in the 6th rule in Raised and Initiation, says that of the Chohans. This center of spiritual life is, quote, like the shadow of a great rock in a weary land. It gives relief, you know. Of course, maybe the great rock is the central stronghold is Shambhala itself. So, you know, is the great rock Shambhala. All right, so that's one thing we have to remember. The hierarchy stands. The second thing I would have you remember is that mankind has marched steadily forward from a state of blind ignorance. Maybe that blindness was quite literal. We do read some material focused on the ancient days millions of years ago when the human being did not really have an eye to see. And the emergence of the eye is something that is treated in some occult literature. But anyway, mankind has marched steadily forward from a state of blind ignorance and unawareness to one of an intelligent preoccupation with life and a growing sense of responsibility. That's where we are now, and it's been millions of years, and one day, you know, as they say, we'll see the movie. Okay. This sense of responsibility, which is awakening in all of you, is, on its present large scale, relatively new, and is one of the factors definitely increasing the distress and pain you are all feeling. Saturn, responsibility, RSP, let's see, RESP. Do I have that? RESPB. Yes, there it is. Saturn, responsibility, and Saturn, pain. You ask yourself, where, as a race, have we failed? And what can we do to rectify our mistakes? Well, he tells us all have sinned. We have all sinned, and humanity has sinned. The word he uses is grievously. So it gives you the shudders when you think about things done and undone over the millions of years. In spite of everything, however, men have gone from stage to stage of intelligent and spiritual unfoldment. From stage to stage of intelligent and spiritual unfoldment. And no matter what the outer happenings have been or may be, the race has made real progress. Yeah, we have to remind ourselves in these dire times, we may face immediately ahead, dire times. There are people in power who shouldn't be in power. And there are dictatorial tendencies rising everywhere, and democracy coming from the hierarchy is threatened. We don't know what we'll have to go through. The hierarchy says it does know, but it's not telling, you know. The race has made real progress. That's the point. We have to remember that for our reassurance, our fortification. There has been no turning back, and there will be none. Mankind has weathered many storms and survived many difficulties. Men have emerged from periods of crisis better and stronger, purified, so as by fire, and definitely nearer the goal. You know, that which, the old saying, that which does not kill you strengthens you. I would, and of course, even if it kills you, it may strengthen your consciousness. I would remind you also of the integrity and solidarity of the human family. This is another one of those memories that we have to hold when things look so tense and suspenseful. We are one people, so his identificatory nature is really coming out here as he speaks. We are one people in our relationships and capacities and desires, our origin and our goal. This applies to everybody, and it's something to be remembered in these days when hate again is rising and people are using the first and the fifth ray, reflective of the energies the Black Lodge uses to drive the wedge of separation between those who should be uh, related to each other in a unified and more loving manner. It is this essential and recognizable integrity which is emerging at this time powerfully in human consciousness. We've just had, who knows when you may be reviewing this, but we've had the issue of whether the United Kingdom will leave the European Union. Seems to be against what Master R would have. And we've had programs about standing for the unity and integrity of Europe. Seemingly, if we wish to understand the direction of hierarchy, unity and integrity are paramount. So it is this essential and recognizable integrity which is emerging at this time powerfully in the human consciousness. The United Nations would be formed maybe 7 years ahead after the writing of this. You are apt to think that this may not be so, that your position in believing this is somewhat unique and that you stand somewhat alone, that it's not really rising in human consciousness, this idea of an essential and recognizable integrity within the human race. But this is your error and is not true to the facts of the case. So probably in the deep wish life of human beings, even at that time, the longing for the unity, for the integrity existed. And it was that really in 1942 which reached the Lords of Liberation and basically saved the day. In every land and among widely differing people, the same desire exists for understanding, for the establishment of right and peaceful relations, and for the expression of that basic goodwill, which is one of the deepest human characteristics and our divine inheritance. So humanity shares these deep longings, even though there are some who choose to assert what they consider to be their rightful domination of others. It's just egotism on a national level. That's what nationalism is. And it is short-sighted and prideful and doomed to fall and doomed to fail in time. These are the things which, it seems to me, are important at this time in which all of us would do well to remember. Will you try to do so? Basically, he's fortifying the consciousness of those who would be passing through this World War II experience. And no doubt, I have many friends in the teaching, and a number of them seem to have this recollection, one way or another, of having passed through this World War II experience. No matter what may take place in the world, whether war or peace, strife and aggression, or understanding, conciliation, and conference, we face a difficult period of adjustment, and for this we must be prepared. The next 3 years are critical. See, it goes to 1942, right? And this we have often been told. This is from May 1939, and a little bit more, 3.5 years. That could have been the defeat of humanity right there in the depth of the lower interlude in 1942, but in ways that we are not allowed to know with full detail. The Lords of Liberation in Shambhala were reached, and a profound disaster was averted. And basically, as we approach the hierarchy, rise through initiate grades and enter the heart center of our planet, the hierarchy, we will know these things in a way far more impressive than we can at the present time. Much will depend upon what you and all men of goodwill and disciples think and what they do, even as it is today. In these next 6 years before 2025, all kinds of things could happen, socially, nationally, ecologically. We could make many more parts of the earth uninhabitable for what we call life, for the life of the human race and the life of various kingdoms of nature. We could do it if we are sufficiently selfish, and there are those among us who are sufficiently selfish. They must be offset. So he's trying to encourage us here, right? Even as he might now. There are many now who see a looming disaster, at least the potential for such, in the present circumstances. I would like to remind you of another most encouraging thing, and that is that the power wielded by those who are seeking to live as souls and in touch with the soul and the world of spiritual realities is out of all proportion to their registered sense of power and usefulness. Now that's really interesting. And basically he's saying we are more powerful than we realize. Spiritual people of the world. Spiritual people of the world, i.e. those who are living as souls and who seek to live as souls. You are, as you endeavor to wield spiritual force constructively and selflessly, far more potent than you realize. Well, that is encouraging, isn't it? I mean, sometimes you count the numbers, and people of this type, hopefully we are of this type, are, it seems, relatively few compared to the billions. Relatively few. But okay, you are far more potent than you realize. Okay, as you endeavor to wield the spiritual force. So, we have to be very powerful, more so than we think, and we have to be very responsible about the power of thought that we wield. If you add to this realization the recognition that you are not alone in this, but the people with a vision similar to yours and with the same ideals and spiritual aspiration are to be found in every country without exception of any kind, in every religion, group, and organization, then indeed you can go forward with courage and with hopeful faith. Now, basically, You can see what he's trying to do here, can't you? He's trying really to fortify the readers among his groups of students, because he, I suppose, sees what's coming. If this is a statement of fact, and I believe it to be so, then let us go forward in unison. There are musical implications to that, with our brothers everywhere, conscious of opportunity, of strength, of responsibility, and of the joy of service. This is his goal here, to fortify us in this period of suspense. I do believe we are heading into periods of suspense and anxiety and uncertainty that are greater than those qualities at present. I see the no let up in the requirement that we hold an ever increasing point of spiritual tension over the next 6 years or so, beyond the up to the Great Conclave, and then beyond that, new instructions will appear, and I cannot really see, as the possibility of the reappearance of the Christ, the externalization of the hierarchy, comes closer, that there will be any let-up in what is required of the disciples of the world, especially, the esotericists I'm speaking of pretty much, but of course, there are so many disciples that know nothing about esotericism, and they can be very powerful, very good, maybe even less trapped in that which makes these occult groups the most glamored of all the groups, he tells us. It's really the principle of egoism and wrong identity. It's spiritual ambition among the intelligent, It does lead to a reduction of effectiveness, and it leads to much friction between those who should be working with each other in terms of unity, integrity, and love. As regards some of the things which you can do, now this is the do part, I would suggest the following. So he's given us the things he wants us to remember, maybe, review those when you study this. Refuse to allow yourselves to be swept by any fear psychosis. Basically, to be overwhelmed by fear is a psychosis. It is a disease of the psyche. Or to be stampeded into any attitude through which the anxiety and unrest and distress in the world can overwhelm you. Well, does that apply for today and for us? I think as we begin to see what's happening in terms of the elemental disturbance in the world, we're going to have to hold this kind of attitude. Don't allow yourself to be swept by fear and or stampeded into some kind of attitude which is not useful because of anxiety and unrest and distress. Okay. Well, there are parallels, because basically here we were on the eve of the precipitation of the second part of the Great War. But everything tends to go in threes, and there could well be a third part to the Great War, in which, at least psychologically and mentally, we find ourselves immersed right now. So this kind of counsel applies to us right now. Strive to stand in spiritual being. And that's a question of alignment and sensitivity and openness to soul and triad and even to the spirit aspect. It's all here right now. If we would not overlook it and somehow get involved in less important matters, strive to stand in spiritual being. I guess that means one really does contact the spirit, and the spirit, in a way, is the heart of the monad. Strive to stand in spiritual being. Each morning in your meditation, seek to take that attitude with a new and fresh definiteness and hold it during the hours of service which lie ahead each day. So practical, right? This will not be an easy thing to do, but it can be done if you can get quiet enough for 5 minutes each morning, completely and interiorly quiet, and if you fill your days with a vital occupation and true service, guarding with care all thought and speech. Okay. Well, certainly we can try to fulfill this. And of course, in the silence lies the synthesis and the appreciation of the larger context in which we are immersed. Even 5 minutes, think of it. He also advises us for a few minutes concerning the sort of golden orange color in triangular formation with the apex of a triangle, a solid triangle, touching the top of the head center, and also the baseline being on the higher mental plane, where the master's influence and the influence of the solar angel can be felt. He says, do that every morning. Rest back in your chair or when you're rising in your bed, rest back and do that. So there are a few ways to prepare for going forth into the day and being able to preserve the right spiritual attitude and to really stand in spiritual being. Such consolidation of the disciples' efforts is required now. We don't have any external war on a global scale breaking out, but we certainly do have the potentials as various nations try to outgun each other, make invincible weaponry and seek dominance over others. Mistaken identity leading to egotism or egoism and then egotism. See, egoism is more the philosophy and egotism is more the result of limitation which occurs when one follows the egoistic philosophy, which is based on a curtailed sense of identity. If we can expand our sense of identity, we'll be doing a lot of which will be of real value. Between now and the Wesak Festival in 1940, so he's looking a year ahead here, let each of you gain that control of speech which has often been your goal, but seldom your achievement, and remember that the most powerful factor in the control of speech is the loving heart. Wow. So there we are. It's so Venusian in a certain way. Venus being the ruler of Taurus, Taurus being the ruler of the throat center, Venus having much to do, at least with the heart center in the solar system. And, the Venus being a solar angelic planet and finally and ultimately a great planet of love, wisdom, and yet the ruler, in a certain sense, of that center which produces speech and is allied to Taurus, the sign of sounding, you might say. So, remember, he says, that the most powerful factor in the control of speech is a loving heart. Just, ponder on that for a moment. And think about where you have infringed the rights of others or hurt others through the power of speech. Of course, you can do that too with the power of thought. And then ask yourself, if you had been under the influence of the loving heart, would that have happened? So this is what to avoid: wild and fearful talk, hateful gossip, cruel innuendo, suspicion, the ascribing of wrong and wicked motives to persons and peoples, and the divergencies of attitude which have separated the many different nations in the world are rampant today and have brought the world to its present distressing situation. So much of the speech, you can just imagine you are hearing Hitler speak at this time. He was obsessed, they say, DK seems to say, by a very, very powerful black entity, maybe, 6 leaders in the West and 6 leaders in the East. Probably one cannot speculate upon who or what that obsessing entity was, but it certainly gave him incredible power. And his speech was hateful in the extreme, as was the speech of other Nazis at the time, and also maybe to a lesser extent of those in Japan, and to a still lesser extent of those in Italy. But they were overshadowed by these forces of hate. Sometimes I think it's better to say overshadowed when we're talking about this kind of process, and overlighted when we're thinking about positive entities influencing the psyche and action and speech and thought. It is so easy to drift into the same habits of speech and thought which we find around us, and to discover ourselves participating in attack and the spirit of hate. Well, basically, DK is just not allowing this, and basically he's telling us that the members of the new group of world servers cannot do this. Members of the new group of world servers cannot thus participate. Of course, at a certain point, he is forced to take sides, and the hierarchy did, and he points out Hitler and his evil gang inverting the Shambhala force, receiving it without the love of the soul. And there are certain nations that have that combination of 1 and 3, devoid of 2. Well, no nation is devoid of 2, but it's nowhere near as strong as the willfulness and the intelligence. So it's so easy to drift into the same habits of speech and thought that we find around us, and to discover ourselves, maybe sometimes much to our surprise, participating in attack and the spirit of hate. Guard yourselves strenuously against this. He really means it. And say nothing which could inflame hate, and suspicion in connection with any race, any person, any group, or any leaders of groups and nations. This is demanding because, you think about the political discourse of the times and just some really apparently outrageous things occurring. And it's easy to be critical, isn't it? I certainly am at times. And I'm sure that a lot of us have this tendency as we look politically at those who are frustrating and even destroying the values which we think are so important. Guard yourselves strenuously against participating in attack in the spirit of hate. Of course, it's possible to identify an enemy and with complete impersonality and with no hate and with no interfering emotion to seek the elimination of that enemy. Some of the great martial arts traditions teach this. I may have mentioned it, but I remember, what was it? A captive was, I'll kind of make up some of this, but this is the idea, questioned by his captor, because he was going to be killed, if there were any final requests that he had, according to the tradition and the honor of the system. And I think the captive spit in the face of the captor, whereupon the captor let him go. Why? Because within his astral body, within his emotions, within his psyche, there arose an emotional reaction of anger, of hatred. It wasn't allowed in his honorable tradition involving, the martial arts, and maybe this was a samurai kind of event. It wasn't allowed. And these people knew how to discipline themselves. Should hate arise, should anger arise, rather than simply the execution of one's duty, then you're not allowed to keep your captive because you have had a reaction to that captive which was unworthy. You will have to guard yourselves with care, so that even in defense of that which you may personally or nationally approve, you do not find yourself full of hate and breaking the law of love, the only love which can truly save the world. Perhaps the key to your success along this line will be the silence of a loving heart. Well, we've been told, how silent the initiate Jesus was as he was passing through his ordeal. He answered so little and saw the uselessness of it, but you could see that he was not filled with hate, and upon the cross he asked for the forgiveness of those who did not know what they were doing when they were crucifying him. He asked the Lord to forgive them, they know not what they do. So is it possible to be resolute in one's principles and even seek the destruction and annihilation of the opposing force, which hierarchy said had been necessary during this war, without violating the law of love, without engaging in hatred? I think, the first-ray types are capable of this. The well-trained first-ray type is capable of this. I'm afraid sometimes when the sixth ray gets involved, as it is during these days of recrudescence of that ray, hatred is more likely to be demonstrated. It will be good to cultivate the joy that brings strength. DK pointed out that sometimes the Black Lodge seizes upon a good mantra before the White Lodge understands or can make it effective. Joy through strength, strength through joy, So I think some of the Hitler youth seized upon that, or their leaders, But it will be good to cultivate the joy that brings strength. Now think about that. If you feel yourself to be weak, as I guess inevitably all of us do at times, that it's the joy itself that's bringing the strength, and not so much the strength that's bringing the joy, although I suppose you'll feel a lot more joyful if you have the strength to carry out your intentions than if you don't. I remember Manly Hall saying, well, why human unhappiness? Well, one of the very first things is its low level of vitality. This is not the time for gloom, despair, or depression. It applies now, too, doesn't it? How confident we have to be, not overweeningly, pridefully confident, but backed by an understanding of the forces with which we are in contact or seek to be in contact, these higher forces which are seeking the manifestation of the divine plan. This is not the time for gloom, despair, or depression. That's something I know it would benefit me to repeat, and maybe some of you. If you give way to these, you become negative and destructive focal points in your environment. We don't want that. If you truly believe that the spiritual life is fundamental in the world today, don't we believe that? If you do believe that divinity guides the world, don't we believe that? If you truly grasp the fact that all men, all human beings, men and women, are your brothers, your sisters, right? And that we are all the children of one father, and even of one mother. And if you are convinced that the heart of humanity is sound, if off to sleep, as he says, are these not adequately potent ideas to hold us joyously steady in the midst of a changing world? So this is how to hold our joy. How to hold our joy. And despite the external vicissitudes, if you truly believe that the spiritual life is fundamental in the world today, would we be studying the Tibetan as we now are if we didn't believe that, and attempting to spread the ageless wisdom wherever we can find the right kind of response? If you do believe that divinity guides the worlds, knowing what we know of the occult structure of the world, how can we not believe that divinity guides the world? If you truly grasp the fact that all men are your brothers and that we are all the children of the one Father, we might say all are emanations, extensions of the monad, immersed in ever-reducing consciousness, which we have to widen. And if you are convinced that the heart of humanity is sound, that's really a big one. And maybe it's this question of passports and visas. He says, do away with these, because then people can go from country to country, get to know each other, and recognize in each other that we really are brothers and sisters. And if you are convinced that the heart of humanity is sound, are these not adequately potent ideas to hold us joyously steady in the midst of a changing world? Well, think about it. These are beliefs that need affirmation and reaffirmation. Every day, we can tell ourselves the spiritual life is fundamental in the world today. Divinity guides the worlds. All men and women are our brothers and sisters. We're all children of the one Father and also the Mother aspect of God. The heart of humanity is sound and will work through and will express itself. Are these not adequately potent ideas? Yes. So they prevent us from descending into hopelessness, gloom, despair, depression. We would become destructive to greater possibilities for others in our environment if we were to give in to these things. It would be harmful. And as we try to cultivate harmlessness, well, part of that is not giving in to these negative states. The achievement of positivity is the goal of the initiate on the second ray, page 507, the rays and the initiations. Will you therefore carry with you the following ideas? So this is an exhortation. I mean, he knows the invasion is coming, and he knows the war, the effort to stop the war, I think, well, you never give up hope, but it's probably been unsuccessful. Stop the war from precipitating. First, that the hierarchy of spiritual forces stands in spiritual being. They are not going to be moved. The hierarchy of spiritual forces, they will not be moved. Well, you can ask yourself then in the winter of 1942, before the turn of the sun, before the solstice there, why was it that the hierarchy was packing its bags? And that has to be only for the good and for the future and for the well-being of the planet, even though we might not understand it if we had gone down to defeat, which we did not, even though they expected it. So, there are always unthought redemptive possibilities, and these came forth from Shambhala. So will you therefore carry with you the following ideas? First, that the hierarchy of spiritual forces stands in spiritual being. Their focus, their residence, their point of tension is held on triadal levels. And as one day as fully restored monads on the monadic level. Second, that we too can stand in spiritual being. Notice how for our encouragement he identifies with us and as us. He could just hold out and be a member of the hierarchy, as it were, but he's right down here in the trenches with us. Third, that the silence of a loving heart should be our keynote for the coming year. Now that's 1939 to 1940, I guess. The silence of a loving heart, which is a lot different than, leaping into criticism in the face of thoughts and ideas and other people that we strongly may disagree with. And number fourth, that our strength to stand is the result of a joyous attitude and a true orientation to the soul. I love that. And I'd like to remember it, wouldn't you? That the strength to stand is the result of a joyous attitude and a true orientation to the soul, the realization of oneself as the soul, the living the life of the soul. The one who stands behind the object, and the personality becomes objective to our point of view as a soul. So these are worth memorizing, aren't they? Because how would we go wrong at any time, including now, to hold these things as great ideas, inspiring ideas, sustaining ideas? First, that the hierarchy of spiritual forces stands in spiritual being. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark. I forget the word, but it's the idea, all prevailing, something of that nature. Ein feste Burg, a mighty fortress. Second, that we too can stand steady in spiritual being. We too, and we must. And do we wake up in the morning with the realization that we too must stand steady in spiritual being? Third, that the silence of a loving heart should be our keynote for the coming year. That sometimes when the silence is pregnant with a solution, rather than some kind of discursive debate, using the concrete mind and the weapons of words and so forth. The silence of a loving heart should be our keynote for the coming year. And then fourth, the strength to stand. Notice how, we're really getting the idea that strength is deriving from joy, and joy is of the soul. The strength to stand is the result of a joyous attitude and a true orientation to the soul, and a realization of oneself as the soul. Now, in order to, I'm stealing time here, and in order to be as effective as possible, we've done about an hour's worth of work here, but I'm not going to break the program. I'm going to go straight on ahead, and just going to call this the end of hour 1, EXH, program 7. And as I say, here we are on the 17th of January, 2019. So we're just, a minute and a half or so from moving forward into the next section about the conflict between the forces of ancient origin. Thank goodness we have been given such a broad perspective on things of importance in our present international setup. Otherwise, our sense of the causes of these things would be badly derived, they would be warped, they would be mistaken. And so, due to the compression of the estimation of man's history on this planet, there's so many mistaken notions which we can which we can overcome by careful attention to the historical presentation in the Ageless Wisdom, so much of which was given in the secret doctrine, the different root races and sub-races and the eras in which they were prominent. And you can read Philip Lindsay's The Hidden History of Humanity and derive a lot of very sound and important knowledge. about these things. But the point is, let's not compress overly much the years in which humanity has been active. Let us understand this vast expanse of millions of years upon this little globe. And for some, millions of years on the moon chain, or millions of years in the previous major solar system. These are great spans of time, and naturally the kinds of periods that we are used to dealing with are dwarfed by the true periods, the true historical periods considered even from a planetary perspective, yet alone a solar systemic perspective. So this is going to be now the beginning of hour 2, EXH, program 7, and 17th of January, and so forth. Okay, then now we will go on. This is beginning the second hour of this program. An intriguing title: Conflict Between Forces of Ancient Origin. Forces about which the average human being has no idea, and about which that human being, and especially the intelligent groups, must begin to form some conception, even though, as DK says, it'll be a long time before humanity as a whole is ready for occultism. We're getting close now. On September 1st, 1939, the invasion of Poland began. And here we are, and we don't know when, written August 1939. And we don't know the day on which it was received, but anyway, it pertains to that particular month. I have already written anent the fivefold stream of energy, which is today in conflict with world forces, or with the forces of light or darkness, so-called. The fivefold stream of energy, as I recall, what we've done here has to do with Shambhala, hierarchy, humanity, and then, depending on which order in which we see it, either the third ray, seventh ray Jewish force, or the first ray, fifth ray materialistic force of the Lords of Form and the Black Lodge, etc. Well, the stream of energy is in conflict with world forces, or with the forces of light or darkness, so-called. I would remind you that there would be no darkness without the light, and no light without the dark. So this gives us some sense of the necessity for the opposites, for polarity. We have to be able to, there's so much contrasting going on in our particular planet. We are to become, as graduates, adjudicators between the pairs of opposites, and each sets the other off and allows us to identify the other as either relatively light or relatively dark. One wonders, what is the state which is neither light nor dark, but which is absolutely essential? And of course, as it has been said, the greater the approaching light, the greater the dark seems. So as we come to that intensification of the light, the darkness also seems to intensify. But in that light, we shall see light, and we move forward into greater and greater intensifications of the light, and that which once had seemed to be the light uh, will actually appear in contrast as the dark. I guess we could say that there are areas of light so intense that what we call presently the light would seem to be darkness itself. I've sometimes used the analogy, I go back maybe 50 years at a Thanksgiving gathering, maybe more than 50 years, and when my aunt used to love photography and floodlights. You know what they are? They're very intense. I was watching the TV at the time, and the floodlights came on, and the light of the TV was completely obliterated. So bright were the floodlights that it seemed that the images that were coming from the TV were complete darkness. I've never forgotten that, or at least the images faded out entirely. When the floodlights were turned off, there were the images again. So light and dark are relative terms. I would ask you to realize that the organized efforts of the Great White Lodge are directed towards lifting the organized forces of materialism to a higher and spiritual plane. That's very interesting. It's not just the banishing, the overcoming, the defeat of, We're told that although these, let's say, the forces of cosmic evil play no real part in the plan of our planetary logos, they do play a part in the plan of the solar logos. Now, these are all basically mysterious statements. The greater the consciousness, ultimately, nothing is left out of the universal pralaya. There's no such thing as having a universal pralaya and a return to complete beingness and infinity and so forth, and leaving some factors in objectivity. It would still be a split. It would not be a resolution. Their objectivity is illusory, and there has to be the final absorption of everything that has been put forth from the universal logos and of the universal logos itself. Today, he says, gold and separativeness, materialism and selfishness are in conflict with spiritual energy and with the spirit of cooperation or understanding fusion. Of course, it doesn't have to be that way, and in the age of Aquarius, we can have an age of spiritual materialism, spiritual materiality. The spiritualization of the material factors is desired and will occur in the age of Aquarius. Okay. The law, which will determine the results, can be expressed in the words that I have often used. By holding, man loses. By relinquishing, he gains. By seeking to grasp that which he has, it must and will inevitably disappear. Reflect upon this law. Well, when we are grasping after the unreal and the illusory, and that which is basically a low appearance and a great condensation of higher spiritual forces, we cannot consider them ultimately graspable, ultimately real. Kind of reminds me of the story of Master R, who held some fabulous banquets for the aristocracy in France and had these marvelous jewels at each place setting as a gift to people, the nobility. And home they went with their prize jewel, only to find that it was kind of an aport and just disappeared. It just dematerialized. So all of these dense condensations are unreal, and by grasping at them, in a way, we violate the teaching of the Buddha, who says, do not desire that which is of the phenomenal world, because it just is insubstantial. It is the result of that which is substantial, true substance. But that which appears as very real, quite dense, quite tangible, is just an illusion, really. What does he say? It's a congestion within matter of a lower type. So this is the law. By holding, man loses. By relinquishing, he gains. By seeking to grasp that which he has, it must and will inevitably disappear. We are not allowed the grasping. It's against the law of crucifixion. And we're thinking, that only the empty, nail-marked hands, which have been trained not to grasp by being nailed to the cross, only they can eventually hold the great abundance which can pour forth into them so that it can be shared with others. This is one of the most profound occult laws, and sometimes it's summarized with respect to Buddhism in the simple terms, let go, let go. But we are, frightened little beings of circumscribed consciousness, and we seek to hold on to that which seems to give us a greater degree of permanence, lest we really disappear. Annihilation maybe is the greatest fear of all, that we shall cease to be. And we have to prove it to ourselves over and over again that we shall not ever cease to be. Being is that which is ineradicable and eternal, without beginning and without end. Those are big concepts, and it's hard to absorb them and make them really meaningful in the way that we live our life, but they can be made meaningful. They can be pondered upon and made meaningful. The methods whereby the forces of separation and of selfishness work are by competitive cooperation. That's I don't ever remember ever reading that. The methods whereby the forces of separation and of selfishness work are by competitive cooperation. You just think of capitalism and all of the competition that is implied in the capitalistic system, and yet somehow there is an agreement among the capitalists that they will compete. There's that much of an agreement, and may the most attractive, the most skillful, the most intelligent, whatever, win. Throughout the world, groups are already formed or are in process of forming to bring about the attainment of various materialistic goals, the achievement of personal or national ambitions, and the imposition of intellectual plans and concepts, the so-called ideologies, upon the mass of the people. It's an imposition, isn't it? And there are those thinkers that believe that we must regiment the masses, the proletariat, those of lesser intellectual capacity who have not really, formulated a system of how to live. The ideologues take it upon themselves to impress their own formulations, often of a very concrete nature, upon those who are younger souls, or younger in terms of experience. So there are the attainment of various materialistic goals. You can see this even now in the jockeying for power among certain countries. Let's just say Russia and China are certainly seeking to rise, and the United States, under poor guidance, seems to be faltering in some respects, and always it's this separative attitude. Maybe Britain once ruled the world, and with its extensive navy and its colonialistic tendencies, but no more. So everyone goes through this period, every nation, of expanded personal ambition and the glory of the personality. Every individual goes through the glory of the personality before it can be relinquished, before it falls. It must fall. In the tarot, the blasted tower is sort of the symbol of that fall of the ego, the lower self-conception, making room through that destruction for a more sensitive and perceptive understanding of identity. So this is going on all the time. We see it today. Certainly, we see it today. The achievement of personal or national ambitions and the imposition of intellectual plans. When you think of what went on in the killing fields of Cambodia under the Khmer Rouge, some French intellectuals, people who were educated in France with all kinds of social formulations, came back and killed millions in order to apply their intellectual plans and concepts. It was heartless, and these people now have been judged. Even some of them are in their high 80s and so forth. They are still being judged. They wreaked havoc upon their country, all because they were focused in the mind in a certain way, and the concrete and minded and heartless plans were forced upon others. So it's not something that this kind of imposition is not something without dire consequences at times. And the so-called ideologies upon the mass of people. I think in recent days, the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, that's been one of the most lethal examples. And Stalin did this too, and probably was responsible for the killing, the murder of more millions even than Hitler. Stalin's mass purges and impositions and starvations and so forth accounted for the death of millions, and that's not about World War II. Soviet Russia may have lost 20 million in the Second World War, but Stalin was responsible, and his henchmen and those who shared his intellectual intention. He was responsible for the death of tens of millions. So was Mao. Here we come, with a concrete mind imposing its way cruelly upon the people, regardless of their thoughts, their welfare. It's as if the keepers know better. The so-called highly educated, at least in the concrete-minded sense, they know better, so they think. And we have great tragedies of mass murder and starvation and so forth as the result of their overweening pride. What may be the karma of these people in the future to soften them up and make them responsive to the heart, we cannot say. But it will come. It must. Parties, organizations, groups, societies, associations, and alliances exist for the furtherance of political and sociological aims and to carry forward the projects of many people and the many differing points of view, plus the many attitudes towards life and its arrangement and rearrangement. Well, World War II was so much a conflict of ideologies, and that conflict continues today. We have all kinds of governmental formulations. We have democracy. Is there truly such a thing? We have representative government, where there's not the direct vote of the people in all things. We have communal living and sharing. We have the leveling of the masses in totalitarian formulations. We have many dictatorships springing up, which usually goes hand in hand with the suppression of the will of others. There are many experiments about how to proceed in the social and national life. Probably ultimately there's going to be some kind of understanding of what monarchy really is from the shambolic point of view, and what democracy really is as it's practiced in hierarchy, and communalism as a symbol of sharing and non-attachment and care for the other will eventually be practiced on the earth and among human beings, as it was in some groups closer to the time of the Christ. But the trouble is we get these ideas in our concrete mind, these thoughts, and we sort of glorify them and deify them almost, and to prove their value, we try to force them on others, and we do not allow freedom of thought, at least not in terms of expression. People can think what they like. The thought police probably don't exist in any effective sense yet, but when you try to express your thoughts in form, then those in power may descend upon you and try to wipe you out as some kind of heresy because they consider it a threat to their particular formulation. So this issue of what freedom is and how it shall be expressed is being worked out right now on our planet and between great nations and collections of people. Anyway, he says all of these different groupings, they have many, they consolidate around different points of view. He says, I'm not here dealing with the churches. The great religions or religious organizations, which certainly have turned in many ways sectarian, deifying just certain practices. When you get baptized, can you be baptized if you're not totally submerged in water? Or can you be baptized simply with water without submersion? And you can fight your way against the other schismatic groups upholding your particular point of view. Very partial, very concrete, and a long way from truth. He says, rather, I am concerned with the determining factors which are today conditioning the material life of the planet. So, it's not so much the inner planes we're talking about here, it's how it's all working out in the conditioned world of the dense physical plane. Speaking broadly, these forces and groups are occupied with material values and mental ideas. So there we go, it's kind of a 1 and 3 combination. People do not have the insight, the penetration to understand what lies behind these expressions. Not yet. Even though indeed in the inner worlds the causal realm lies. I'm remembering that DK said that if Nazism ever prevailed, it would produce the most materialistic civilization we have ever seen. And notice the emphasis that divided one group from another was very material in the in the Nazi mind. So speaking broadly, he says these forces and groups are occupied with material values and mental ideas is not higher mind really at all. They are not principally occupied with the more subtle values, though these are incidentally present. Excuse me. I think, there were many of the Germans and the Nazis who were mystically inclined. And, of course, the glamour was very, very thick. And even during the World War I period, channelers supposedly getting information from extremely high sources were influencing those in high places of power. And who knows how it was in World War II. The emphasis is upon, basically, the economic situation. Hitler being a Taurus, the acquisition of other people's resources was very important to him so that Germany could rule the world. Because Germany alone did not have the resources in which to conduct a continuing, aggressive, expansive war. So he looked towards nations in terms of their raw materials and the taking over of those raw materials for the benefit of his country. So the emphasis is upon the economic situation, upon the possession of land or cultural predispositions and tendencies, and with the relations between people and nations. Of course, then German culture was considered superior to all others. And of course, they had some basis in terms of music. Great musicians were appearing there, but I remember I had a singing teacher once, and he was an Austrian, and he made it out before you couldn't make it out. And he was fond of saying, that we were talking about Beethoven and maybe doing some Beethoven songs and so forth. He says, Beethoven would have lasted 1 day in the Third Reich. I believe that's probably so, such an independently minded power as Beethoven was. He couldn't go along with the banality of the evil present. So anyway, the emphasis is upon the economic situation, upon the possession of land or cultural predispositions and tendencies, and the relations between people and nations. That's what they were living through at the time that this was written. These latter are based fundamentally, as you know, on that which is tangible and objective, guarded, defended, or gained, and procured by definitely tangible means, which are in themselves separative and divided. Let's just say the German theft of the art treasures of the world was a profound crime. I think Hermann Goering was much involved in that. DK says he was not as evil as some of the others, you know. There was so much Capricorn going on in that group. The earth signs, really, Capricorn and Taurus, were very, very strong, and the spirit of acquisition was very, very strong. But anyway, Germany had the right to everything, you know, steal the treasures, art treasures of every nation, and hoard them in Germany, which was going to become the greatest power and the greatest cultural source in the world. So there are, you know, cultural tendencies, and the DK is talking about the materiality that was operative in relation to them. So the tendencies, and with the relations between people and nations, well, it's going to be theft will prevail under that particular system. These latter are based fundamentally, as you know, on that which is tangible and objective. It's not the subtle brotherhood, shared soul, shared essence, none of that. Guarded, defended, or gained, and procured by definitely tangible means, which are in themselves separative and divided. This statement, I think, the people of every nation would regard as true. The basic underlying methods employed are those of organizational arrangement, large as in nations, or smaller as in the groups within the nations, propaganda, the imposition of favored ideas through the use of the spoken and written word in every country, group loyalty, group adherence to the leader, the group methods. But of course, a negative expression of group methods, not the truly Aquarian group, but one which needs the Führer, you know, the leader, the Duce. Success depends upon the gained group cohesion, the group willingness to sacrifice plus loyalty and allegiance to some directing personality. Now, he really wants the esoteric groups of the world not to fall victim to this, not to fall victim to adherence to the ways of some centralizing personality that is directing the group. Anyway, let's just say all of this sums up in a way we might call it a materialistic, whoops, I think I'm in the wrong part of the typewriter here, a materialistic approach, not a subtle approach to humanity and culture. There's so much lying going on, you know, people hired to denigrate the cultures of other countries, and let's say especially of Jewish musicians and artists, and to exalt the German creators, maybe especially Wagner, who was bringing the gods forward. Of course, it's not is it realized in Wagner that the ancient gods had their Götterdämmerung and their twilight, and they faded, and his last opera was extremely Christian in a certain way, Parsifal. So, but it's only by reinterpreting what Parsifal meant that it could be accepted by the Nazis, whose music, let me say, was pa, and so inferior to the great creativity of the German soul. Maybe Bach was not so popular because he certainly served the Christ in the Christian perspective. Behind these many groups stand the forces of ancient origin which are pledged either to the material or the spiritual values. So we can never forget, if we think that mankind is somehow the author of all that seems to emanate from it, it's not true. There are great centers of power, either for good or for ill, behind so much that is precipitating on the planet. Behind these many groups stand the forces of ancient origin, going back into Atlantis, going back into Lemuria, but maybe especially in Atlantis, because by that time the moon chain types had joined the planetary process, at least by the third subrace. So we had a more complete group, and the remnants of the previous solar system were there too. Everybody was present, working out their particular orientations, and very different orientations they were, and the conflicts had to be considerable. One day we'll reflect upon these things. We'll see how we participated. Probably there'll be some horrible moments of realization, and others where victory was indicated. Because many ages have gone by in the building up of the material values, first the foundation, right? The builder of the foundation, the third ray, the personality, to the development of the personality consciousness, and to the achievement of a tangible and objective civilization, the forces of materialism are apparently far stronger and more potent than the forces of the spirit or of the intangible worlds. Well, they always seem to win first, because they do have the anchor in the material world, but not eventually. Eventually, the higher aspects of the human being and of society and of humanity as a whole prevails. Now, this probably we would see if we could see history as it has really been lived. So the material values have come first, and these days there is a re-emphasis upon the material values as we sort of tremble at the threshold of new spiritual possibilities. The fear reaction always comes in when we are presented with the new and apparently not understood factors which are descending and which will be the mode of expression in coming times. Anyway, the forces of materialism are, I guess the important word is apparently, far stronger and more potent than the forces of the spirit or of the intangible worlds. Now, people like ourselves, we represent, as much as we possibly can, the spirit and the intangible worlds. And it's a hard sell, Even our spirituality can be quite materialistic, and in the minds of many, whatever post-mortem state may be indicated by heaven is often quite material. It just depends on the mind and imagination of the one who is conceiving the future. We do really have to do a lot to elevate the thinking power and the imagining power of individuals who can be reached, so that when man makes God in his own image, we have a God closer to what God is. Up to the present, this has not been wrong, though it has been accompanied by much that has been undesirable and has led to one-sided evolution. So, okay, the emphasis upon the foundation, third ray, the builder of the foundation, has not been wrong because it is at least giving an anchor and some stability in the world of condensation, in the phenomenal worlds, the matter energy of which has to be redeemed and made far more responsive to the themes of this present second major solar system. But here's the dividing point, isn't it, between the two and the three, The tendencies of the previous solar system were very mental material, and now we're talking about emotionality and the heart and love in our present second major solar system. But the time has now come for the shift of the human consciousness into the world of true and spiritual understanding and of the intangible and more desirable standards of living. And because that time has come and the pressure from within forces this new agenda into the world, the wars arise. I mean, if man were perfectly content to remain material in his desires and aspirations, maybe there would not be such a counter attack by the forces of materialism that naturally want to maintain their prerogatives. But since such a strong spiritual thrust has entered through the more developed and the thinkers, spiritual thinkers of the world, then to maintain its material and materialistic prerogatives, the counterforce fights back. And hence the world wars and all these movements which emphasize the more constricted part of the human being. Pouring through the chaos of offensive and defensive groups, and through the many warring organizations, political for the most part, or religious, those are the two areas where so much trouble exists. And when he tells us that house cleaning must occur, it's in the political and religious groups. By the way, I've been always trying to count how many devils were swept out of the house, and I guess there was one major devil who wasn't so successful after he left the house and says, I think I'll come back to the old house that I used to inhabit. But when he came back, he found that it had all been cleaned up, and it was a little beyond his power to do anything. So he solicited the help of 7 other devils, more evil than he, more powerful than he, and they came and inhabited the previously swept house and caused a lot of trouble because of the neglect of the owner of the house, thinking the job had already been done. And why remain vigilant? Well, never say to Master M, why remain vigilant? Because you'll get quite an answer. He really demands from us vigilance all the time. And I think, there's nothing like the vigilance of the first-rate type, with its eagle eye, so to speak. I've had experience with this type of individual, and it makes my own type of vigilance seem quite feeble. So we all learn from each other. Pouring through the chaos of offensive and defensive groups and through the many warring organizations, political for the most part, or religious, and affecting both the reactionary bodies, they want the old way, just fine for them, limitation is just fine for them, and those who stand for the new ideals and the coming civilization and culture are the 5 streams above mentioned streams of energy. So into all of this conflict, this warring situation, the 5 streams of energy pour, and they have their effects. Now, what are we affected by? Well, certainly by humanity. We are affected increasingly by hierarchy. How much we are affected by Shambhala remains to be seen, at least in any conscious sense. Maybe the Jewish force has some effect over us, and the Black Lodge will affect everybody, but it's not our group to deal with. They're too powerful, and sometimes people naively say, oh, well, we can't seal the door where evil dwells, because psychologically that's not sound. It just goes underneath in the personality and causes more trouble, except when you're not really capable in terms of your strength of dealing with a certain group, you have to seal it away, because you'd be devoured, you'd be destroyed if you tried to confront it as if it was an enemy you could deal with. The hierarchy has to deal with such groups. All right, so the 5 streams of energy that I've just named, they pour into all of this. See, this is how it is now. Many warring ideologies and the and the organizations which represent them. So at this point, I would remind you that the effect of the impact of energy is dependent upon the nature of the vehicle of response. Well, this is a principle that he now and then emphasizes. The way we see that, let's say that a sign of a zodiac, which is attuned to the constellational energy of the zodiac of constellations, brings in the type of energy for which it is known, but impacts different types of human beings. The undeveloped, the developing, the advanced, then the disciples and initiates. And in each case, because the vehicle is different, the response to that range of energies that's coming in is going to be distinctive. The lower type just cannot respond the way the initiate would, even though, let's say, it's the energy of Aries in both cases. And this is where this doctrine of 3 types of rulers, orthodox, esoteric, and hierarchical, is so important. It just adds immeasurably to an understanding of astrology and why we cannot look at the influence of a particular sign as a uniform in the expected response of human beings. So anyway, the impact of energy is dependent upon the nature of the vehicle of response. If you have a purified vehicle and atoms of a higher nature, higher vibration, and permanent atoms which are their type, atomic matter, is more present in the vehicle, then it's going to be a high and subtle response. And if it's simply a crude receptacle, you're going to get the type of response that goes with that. There's so much difference. Let's just say I'm using Aries as the first sign. They're responding in a Martian way or a Mercurian way. and even a Mercurian way contrasted with the Uranian way. A very different quality of response. So according to his equipment and the nature of his bodies, so will man react to the inflowing energies, and this is a fundamental statement. And that's why, when you're doing astrological charts, you've got to know who you're dealing with, really, and the level of evolution of the one who is receiving the energies that are indicated in the astrological chart. Very different use will be made of these energies. It is a law and should be most carefully considered. The effect of a master or initiate upon men the effects are widely different, because each man brings to the impact of his, a master's vibration, a type of physical body, an astral or emotional nature, and a mind which are in each case different from all the others. It's really hard to generalize, and we go astray when we get fixated upon certain generalized interpretations. So, when doing esoteric astrology, you really should be able to study the individual or the group concerned first before applying the horoscopic indications. The use each makes of the stimulating energy will be different. The focus of his consciousness is very different. His type of mind is quite different. His centers, their activity, and their internal organization are different. Not so much is said about the internal organization of a chakra, but if a planet is a chakra in a larger sense, it certainly has many different ways of being internally organized, and thus it is as well with the chakra in a human being. And it is the same for groups, organizations, and nations. So there is a qualifying effect that we have to be aware of, and if we're not, we're just going to misinterpret that interaction between the available energies and the form upon which they are making their impact. And that's why, the study of the individual or group, even in a normal sense, what are their rays, let's say? What is their degree of advancement? What's their objectives? Toward what do they aspire? What is their general level, etc.? When you know those things, you can better understand the effect of the astrological and planetary, systemic, whatever cosmic energies that are making their impact. Nations, for instance, have 7 centers, even though they're not always given, right? I think the ones in the United States are somewhat given, but not always, and the ones in the sort of former British Empire or the British Commonwealth are somewhat given. Great cities are proposed as certain types of centers. London, Sydney, Australia. I forget them all, but we would just have to look that up and you'd get the idea in this far-flung organization of interrelated groups and nations, which cities express as different chakras. So nations, for instance, have 7 centers, as have all forms of existence, from the human and animal upwards, and of course many more than 7 centers. Centers are major, minor, and minute. They are all that. And it is an interesting study to discover these centers and to note the type of energy which flows through them. Maybe he's going to give us a little bit of that right now. In connection with the United States of America, Chicago is the solar plexus center. I guess I was born there. Okay, different from being born in New York, which is the throat center, and Washington is the head center, and the heart center is Los Angeles. Okay, so the very thing that I was talking about is here uh, presented. I think Kansas City is involved, and maybe New Orleans, and well, we're given four, right? And maybe Boston in terms of a Agnes Center. I don't know, but some, certain cities within the United States will be added to these and form the rounded out complement of 7. Now, the heart center of Germany is Munich. It's interesting that Hitler was so successful there at first. And its head center is Nuremberg. Yes, where the trials were held, and also the great rallies which inspired along a very questionable path millions of Germans in the lead up to the Second World War. Whilst Berlin is the throat center, and we can, and basically we can say, okay, well, if New York is the throat center, then there's kind of an analogy between New York and Berlin, and between Washington and Nuremberg, etc. Interesting. And of course, Berlin was divided. I don't know where the main governmental centers are right now in Germany. That would take a separate study on my part, but this is 80 years ago we're talking about, and maybe some of that has been continued. It was certainly interesting that the wall, which had to be torn down eventually, was the Berlin Wall, and it all had to do with the rivalry between the United States and Soviet Russia in the latter days of the war. And this is interesting. London is, of course, the heart center for Great Britain. I guess it's not including Northern Ireland, but instead Scotland, Wales, and England. And temporarily it is also the head center, though this will not always be the case. Whilst, okay, well, the very thing I was looking for is right here in front of me, right? So this is interesting, the sharing of the function of two chakras in London. Both the heart center and temporarily the head center, the seat of government at the moment, though this will not always be the case. This is Great Britain. Okay, I'm just trying to isolate these things a little bit so we know where to go and how to think. And this information, of course, should be combined with that which is given in the destiny of the nations. I mean, what a new and interesting way to look at the nations in which we live and the nations in which we don't live, and how their interaction will occur. Whilst Ottawa is the throat center and Sydney is the solar plexus, certainly is below the equator of the British Empire. So Ottawa is the capital city, actually, of Canada, with its Libra and Taurus emphasis, just the way China has. I think they're even the same way. That I'm trying to think. The outer sign is Libra with its third ray, and the inner sign is Taurus with its first ray and its connection with the throat. So the whole of China is ruled by Taurus and Libra, and looks like Canada is ruled by Taurus and Libra. And Ottawa is the so-called British Empire. Well, it never didn't remain an empire, but it did, shall we say, remain a commonwealth. all speaking the same language and sharing economically much in terms of trade. Someday I may indicate to you the centers through which the forces of manifestation have to work for the various nations, or maybe the lower ones, base of the spine, sacral center, and so forth. This information constitutes one of the major hierarchical sciences and indicates to us who know it the possibilities latent in any nation. Okay, so when we face a book like The Destiny of the Nations, we know that this hierarchical science is being given to us in some measure. So, to those who know, the masters who know, the possibilities latent in any nation, the point of attainment, and the opportunities for work and advancement of the obstacles to progress, all these things are indicated. This is gauged by the light in the centers and the heightening and obscuration of their vibration. Sometimes when you're flying at night, you see many different cities under you because your altitude is so high, and some are of vast extent and really brightly illumined, and others are smaller and have less illumination. And that's just a very tangible view, some symbol of the deeper, more occult thing he's talking about here. It is this that makes possible or hinders the growth of what is called spirituality in individuals and in nations, and this science will later be recognized, the science of the chakras in the nations, and showing what their potentials may be. Matter of fact, I think I've got to do something there. Yeah. It is this that makes possible or hinders the growth of what is called spirituality. The science will later be recognized. It is by means of this science that the hierarchy can form its larger plans, and know in what manner individual nations will react to stimulation and to progress of the desired kind. This is the modern form of the ancient Atlantean Laya Yoga, or the yoga of the centers. Nations themselves are centers, and within the nation there are centers. So all part of the divine plan. All part of the divine plan. Now, so this is, let's just say, the end of our 2 EXH program 7, and we're still here on the 17th of January 2019, and this is going to be the beginning. Whoop, going to make a mess there. Okay, the beginning of our 3 on this program, EXH program 7, 17th of January 2019, and maybe we'll see whether I stop the length of this after 3 hours of work. Okay, friends, I think we can go ahead now, and this will probably be the last hour in this particular program. Not because I couldn't make it longer. What is my record? 6 hours? 5 hours, certainly 6 hours. But it's probably safer not to do that, Anyway, trying to get my chronometer going here. Yep, it's going. So we're talking about the ancient Laya Yoga, but on a national scale. We're also talking about what is the effect of various energies as they impact forms according to the nature and quality of the form. So as he goes on here to say, and what page are we on after all? Might not be bad to know that. Um, page 86, it appears. According, therefore, to the condition of the sensitive bodies of the planet, of nations and of individuals, so will be their reaction to the 5 kinds of inflowing force. He really does develop this idea of these 5 very important types of force, with which we all have to deal on a more or less conscious basis. Let's see here. I think I don't want this. This is all the news, some of which is unfit to print. Anyway, so, yeah, that's the beginning of World War II right there. Right in Virgo, interestingly enough, September 1st, 1939. At least it's the precipitation of the war on the outer plane. So, the Shambhala force, for instance, in making its impact upon first ray types and upon the other ray types on that line of major energy, third, fifth, seventh types, evokes widely differing results than when it makes its impact upon the second ray line of energy. I think maybe we can all somehow, if we think deeply, attest to that. The result of the impact of Shambhala energy on first ray individuals and nations can be potent in the extreme. I think about Germany with its first ray personality. Well, we have China, first ray soul, India, first ray soul. There are some others. Okay, the result of the impact of Shambhala energy upon first ray individuals and nations can be potent in the extreme. Hitler surrounded himself with very first ray types. At least the first ray was considered the sub-ray, as DK explains it. The results, this impact being relatively a new one to humanity, evokes in the world today all the political and organizational changes which are so prevalent and so disturbing. Not necessarily good, not necessarily bad. There's little that humanity can do about this except endeavor to balance this first ray display of energy with second ray or hierarchical force. Well, this is the very thing which some nations do not seem to be doing, and certainly did not at the time of when the Nazis were flourishing. This latter energy working through the world religions and the men and women who respond to the love influence can change methods, though not the purpose or direction, by pouring in the love force. It's kind of interesting that the direction is determined, well, by the first ray energy, by the Shambhala energy. And when we look at the names of monads, we have the director, which with the first ray monad, connected with direction, and then the teacher on the second ray, and the, manipulator it's called, or creator on the third ray, and on it would go. But he gave us particularly the first, the names for monads on the first 3 rays. Okay. Again, that force which we regard as emanating from the strictly human center, the third ray type of energy, is of the third or creative order. Creative, see? The ray of creative intelligence. That's the name that he seems to prefer. And in these 3 energies, you have in reality the expression of the 3 major centers of the planetary logos, I suppose, head, heart, and throat. The first, or will energy, is, as you know, focused in Sanat Kumara, the Ancient of Days, as he is called in the Christian Bible, the Lord of Shambhala. He's also, in a way, the highest example of the teaching ray on our planet. And he's given various descriptions. He's here looked at as the embodiment of the personality of the planetary logos. Sometimes he's the embodiment of the soul of the planetary logos, or of the soul-infused personality of the planetary logos. But he has a lot of the second ray, even though he is the Lord of Shambhala. Maybe the planetary logos is more identified finally with the monadic aspect, which is the ultimate first ray. Let's just say, so there are many names and assignments of function for Sanat Kumara. But you know, this is from a practical point of view. We're looking at this. So Sanat Kumara does wield the first ray force, but it is, I think, strongly tinctured with the other two energies, and especially the second ray. You know, so many of the names seem to carry the love vibration. And of course he is an emanation of the planetary logos, and so any final first ray in a monadic sense has to rest with the planetary logos. How these emanations work on very high levels, well, one day, you know, we will come to understand that. There's a lot of, in the Buddhist art and iconography and so forth, there's a lot about emanation theory. Probably much is hidden in that, which would reveal to us how these emanations work on very, very high levels. Okay, the love force is focused through two great spiritual lords of the hierarchy, the Buddha and the Christ, who are both embodiments of the heart center of the planetary logos, where the Buddha represents the 12-petaled lotus in the head, of which the Christ represents the counterpart, the 12-petaled lotus of the heart center. And that's a very important statement. Now, the interesting thing is, the Buddha is very much associated with intelligence as well, because when we read carefully from a treatise on cosmic fire, we learn that the Buddha and 9 others are really third-ray monads. But since there are, I think, 2 monadic rays for all individuals, a major monadic ray, 1, 2, or 3 on the logoic plane, and then any one of the 7 on the monadic plane, we don't know what the final monadic ray might be. We just know that the cosmic mind is associated with the Buddha, and his enlightenment at the 6th degree was a touch of the cosmic mental plane, whereas the Christ, being more solidly on the second ray, touched the cosmic astral plane. So the intelligence is very strong with the Buddha, and it's a cosmic intelligence, and then he had that first ray personality which allowed him to persist as he did. Okay, so the Buddha represents the 12-petaled lotus in the head, of which the Christ represents the counterpart, the 12-petaled lotus of the heart center. That's something we really want to remember. At least I do. And I would think, you know, it does give a distinction, because the head is the place where what we normally call the normal type of intelligence, brain intelligence, mind intelligence, has a point of anchorage. But the Christ is all on the second ray soul, and probably pure second ray. on the monadic plane and on the logoic plane. But in there somewhere is the Buddha's third ray. Okay, this is a fact seldom grasped or even mentioned, and that's so true. Always comes as a surprise to me when I read it. The petals of the throat center are represented at this time by certain of the leading world rulers whose activity is responsible for the rapid creation of the new world with its rapidly altering civilization and culture. So we're talking about, we're talking about the representation within the logos within Sanat Kumara. It's focused in Sanat Kumara, the Lord of Shambhala. Yeah, we're talking about that which represents the planetary logos, and Sanat Kumara is representing the first ray, but as I say, he's got a strong connection to the solar logos, and as the highest example of the teaching ray on the planet, and the Lord of sacrifice, if you think about it, the great sacrifice. A lot of the second ray of love, wisdom is there. Well, who knows what the percentage might be, but it's well to remember that. Then the Christ and the Buddha, with the Buddha having more of the conventional mental intelligence per se, and the Christ having the intuitive intelligence, and then certain leaders representing the throat center of the planetary logos. Now, in a certain way, the new group of world servers is said to represent the ajna center of Sanat Kumara, the hierarchy, the heart center as a whole, humanity, the throat center. There are different ways that different chakras can be viewed. So these thoughts will provide much that you would do well to consider. So let's just take a quick look here. If we look at, let's see, Ajna. Okay, Ajna Center Sanat. Let's see what that gives us. I'm not sure what it gives us. From the Ajna Center of which he is possessed to the head center of the initiate and immediately to the Ajna Center of the initiate. Maybe I think if I do this, maybe not. New group of world servers. Doesn't have two R's in it, does it? New group of world servers, Ajna. And the Ajna Center of the Lord of the World, is just beginning to express itself. It's not put here as Sanat Kumara. The reason I couldn't find it is because it's listed as that of the Lord of the World. It is in itself in a recognizable manner, expresses itself in a recognizable manner through the new group of world servers. Okay. Through the Christ, though the Christ is the head of the hierarchy, it is Sanat Kumara, the Ancient of Days, whose ashram it truly is. The Christ, I'm using one of his official names, is indeed the master of all masters and the coordinator of the entire life of the ashram in conjunction with the two other hierarchical officials. Well, I have this, and there's a video commentary on all of this. Not that I've said all that could be said or should be said, but I've gone through these, and this is part of the video commentary, I believe, and there's also written commentary on the rules themselves. Anyway, Lord of the World, Sanat Kumara, the new group of world servers, the Ajna Center. I suppose hierarchy as the heart center, and somehow Shambhala as the head center, and let's see what else we have here. The fourth type of force, which is responsible for the state of world affairs at this time, is that of the Jews, the Jewish force. We can use the color yellow connected with Mercury. I'm not always putting in a proper color, but why not? They as a whole constitute the solar plexus of the planetary logos. And basically we have to see when we're talking about a chakra that is in the system of Sanat Kumara and when we're talking about a chakra which is in the system of the entire planetary logos. So the Jewish force, the solar plexus of the planetary logos, and not that of SK, but of the planetary logos. Their problem is being used today to focus, qualify, and condition the world feeling nature and the emotional reactions of the sensitive nature of humanity and of the planetary logos. Every center is used, and it's just a very, well, let's just say a very touchy type of situation around the fate of the Jews, especially at this time or at that time, because already the hatred was spread tremendously and concentration camps were already beginning to appear. Of course, we have to remember how many millions of people who were not Jews were also killed in these concentration camps. It's such a separative attitude, the undesirables, the Untermensch, the low forms of human beings in the eyes of the Nazis. These had to be eliminated in order to create that purification which they longed for as the prerequisite of the restitution of their Teutonic powers. And, believing in reincarnation as so many of them did, then they would then be part of a race that had been purified of all the impure elements. There were some of these Nazis that were pushing the second initiation. It can be taken even by those who veer off afterwards onto the left-hand path. So they knew how to protect themselves and how to purify, but for selfish reasons, So we don't know if any of them achieved that second initiation and then went beyond it and chose the negative path, or whether they were hovering around that initiation. Some of them, certainly Hitler, I would say, obsessed with purity. And among the most ferocious of the murderers, Hitler and Eichmann and Reinhard Heydrich, they felt or were accused of having Jewish ancestry, some strand of Jewish ancestry, and so they were more virulently attacking the Jews than the ordinary persecutor. This is also true of Tommaso de Torquemada, the Grand Inquisitor of Spain. Actually, he had Jewish ancestry in some respects, so he worked twice as hard against the Jews and others who were not in the purely Catholic, fulfilling the purely Catholic requirements. Anyway, the Jews helped to focus, qualify, and condition the world-feeling nature. Some of DK's disciples who were Jewish were very sensitive to the whole situation, even though DK assured them that their identification with the Jewish race was a question simply of their present incarnation and not previous to that. So it's very difficult to know who really were the nomads wandering from the previous solar system and, who were simply not that, but they were found in Jewish bodies. Forget not that the personality of our planetary logos is not yet perfect. How could it be? He's not even yet a cosmic initiate of the second degree. Hence the fact that his body of manifestation, the planets, is not reckoned as being one of the sacred planets. So it is the body of manifestation that is focused upon when we speak of sacred or non-sacred planets. And maybe that's going to help us understand what it means that our particular planetary logos is sacred inwardly, maybe in his some of his higher vehicles, but not sacred outwardly. So that's interesting. So his body of manifestation, hence the fact that his body of manifestation is not reckoned as being one of the sacred planets. So it has a lot to do with the condition of the outer planet, and especially since our planet is divided, sacred inwardly and not sacred outwardly, through the Jewish people throughout the world feeling sympathetic or antagonistic, expressive of love or conditioned by hate, is being gathered to a focus in the planetary solar plexus center, preparatory to a great and permanent change. And you kind of wonder, does this have to do, what has this change to do with the Holocaust, if anything? It is for this reason that I have said to some of my pupils that when humanity will have solved correctly the Jewish problem, and when it has been resolved in a humanitarian and sound manner, then the energy of the planetary solar plexus will have been raised to the heart center and a great transmutation will have taken place. Now, maybe some of that's going to happen during the Aquarian Age. He kind of focuses about 500 years from now in some of his writings, and the Jews will still be around and will represent something different than they do now. Now, the fifth group, he oftentimes changes 4 and 5, 5 and 4. He alternates these. The dark or materialistic forces correspond in their entirety to the energies of the sacral center of the planet, dealing with the generation of forms, and their work is to keep the direction of planetary interest upon the form side of divine expression. And notice how he basically says they have work. It's almost as if what they do is a necessity. Well, at least it is in the eyes of the solar logos. So the dark or materialistic forces, dark because I guess, light does not penetrate into the dense form the way it does in the subtler vehicles. The dark or materialistic forces correspond in their entirety to the energies of the sacral center. They are sort of Ray 1 and Ray 5 forces, interestingly enough. And those are energies which are not usually associated with the sacral center, but now we're just talking about the form creating center, and that center is considered very supplementary and an evocation and not a true center at all. Probably a disappearing center at some time. Maybe have a lot to do with the division of the sexes in Lemurian times, which is an impermanent condition. Sometimes he speaks of the Asna center and the sacral center as not enduring and not being real centers in the vehicles. So, forces dealing with the generation of forms. Now we have Uranus usually as the ruler of that center, and that tells us something about seventh ray Uranus. And their work is to keep the direction of the planetary interest upon the form side of divine expression. And you see a humanity which really tends to focus on the form. So from a certain perspective, it seems that their work is successful from the point of their own limited purpose, but that won't last for long. They are concerned with the life of matter itself, with its magical usage. So, let's add the third ray here. And with that which is regarded as dark, because for humanity at its present stage of development, that divine aspect should have lost its major hold and should lie behind in the darkness of that which has been outgrown and which has no further hold upon the Son of God. Okay, so with this magical use, yes, they form all this. Darkness is a lowered intensity of radiation. As I said before, it's very relative what is dark and what is light, but evil is oftentimes discussed as the good that should have been outgrown. So they're very much tied up with the third aspect of divinity. Let's just say that, focusing upon the third aspect of divinity. And indeed, that is darkness compared to the light of love, which should be developed by humanity at its present stage rather than retrogressively returning to a focus upon matter. Hence, Hatha Yoga with its focus upon the material energies is sometimes, most often, considered inappropriate for modern man, even though it seems to be the type of yoga that is of greatest interest to so many. But of course, the Laya Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Gnani Yoga, Raja Yoga, Agni Yoga, all those types of yoga lie on ahead, with Raja Yoga being our main focus and Agni Yoga coming up. So you have therefore the following tabulation expressing what I have sought above to make clear to you. So we've been really working with these 5 streams of energy, haven't we? And now we are going to tabulate them again. He keeps on switching 4 and 5 and 5 and 4. But 4 seems interesting for the Jewish force, because it's my impression that some kind of aspect of the fourth ray in the monadic nature is present. I do believe that is the case. Okay, so he's working now with this 4th type of force. In this tabulation, at least, it's the Jewish force. In some of the other listings, it comes in 5th in order for whatever reason. I would point out here that the 4th energy, focused in the Jewish problem, is definitely producing cleavage as a part of the divine plan. Now, you can understand that the 5th ray rules the law of cleavages, and sometimes he lists the Jewish group as 5th in order, even though the 5th ray is not directly associated with them, even though they have a lot of scientific achievement. It's the 3rd and 7th rays, particularly, that are associated with them. But anyway, cleavage is being produced as part of the divine plan. The Christ says, I come to bring not peace, but the sword. It's always the sword of discrimination. And there is a kind of need to understand the distinction between the 3rd aspect of divinity and the 2nd. And a lot of the Jewish group is strongly representing the 3rd aspect of divinity through the 3rd and 7th rays. And that's set aside over and apart from the love presentation when Christianity is working properly. And the distinction there is being made clear, and there is a bridging going on of the Jewish group into the more loving relationship. This has a lot to do with Virgo being the rising sign of the Jewish group, and Virgo bringing in more of the second ray at this time than any of the other second ray constellations. The Christ, was born of the Virgin, born of Virgo. Jesus was born under Virgo. Virgo is the rising sign, at least according to one of the astrologers in Denmark who's done a big study on this, Holger Salmsbjerg, has done a lot of good work. It's a Capricorn Virgo system, and the whole Jewish people are under Capricorn personality and Virgo soul. So it all makes sense, this bridging toward the second ray. The Jews are instruments in the working out of the plan for the production of certain syntheses, maybe involving intelligence, and to bring humanity to certain realizations and decisions. So the whole group is being used, and of course this occurred before the Holocaust was really in full expression. I read the other day that at the height of the processing within the death camps, 14,000 people a day were being killed, murdered. Many of them Jews, but not all, of course. 14,000 a day. This is this place of endless death, as the Black Lodge's habitat is described. So it was a horror, and apparently not something that we can understand in terms of the karma, not yet anyway, but one day we will. A close study of this tabulation will bring you much knowledge. However, it only expresses the present situation in this interim period between the old Piscean age, which is passing, and the new Aquarian age, which is coming in. So that's something, under the law of mutation, things are constantly changing their position, as it were, their function. It depicts this present world cycle. The emphasis of the rays changes in connection with the last two types of energy expressions quite constantly, because they are symbolic in this day and age of the personality nature in its physical and emotional forms. So let's just say the rays associated with the Jews and with the Black Lodge change, because these two groups represent the personality of, I suppose, the planetary logos, or maybe Sanat Kumar. I don't know for sure. Anyway, we know that even with nations, whereas the soul ray will tend to remain the same, the personality ray will change. I kind of wonder about Japan, with Japan we have a fourth ray soul, sixth ray personality, a sixth ray apparently Capricorn personality, a fourth ray Scorpio soul. Do we still have the sixth ray Capricorn personality, given all the incredible changes which occurred in Japan following the war and following the dropping of those two nuclear devices? I suppose DK will straighten this out and bring some kind of continuity between what he's written and what he intends to write. And of course, we're very close to being able to become aware of what he's going to write. It starts in 2025, pretty much. I wonder, he says, whether you can grasp the implications of this paragraph. When the mind aspect, the third aspect of the personality, is more fully developed, then the focus of the efforts of the dark forces will change, and the problem of the Jews will disappear. It's as if they will not be so influenced by this aspect of divinity. When the mind aspect, the third aspect of the personality, is more fully developed, then the focus of the effort of the dark forces will change. And the problem of the Jews, based on that separative third ray, will disappear. Mankind is not yet handling its problem intelligently. And let's just say rather emotionally under the ray 6. Thus, the forces and energies of the creative process are exceedingly active at this time in preparing what I might call the material of the world and the substance of all the four kingdoms in nature for the coming changes. And so let's just say much focus upon the realm of density in preparation. And right. So, this is the paragraph he wants us to understand. He writes in symbolic language. The Jews are certainly helping to prepare the material of the world as it's expressed here. He says, DK says they have a very great sensitivity, almost a sympathy for the material element, and that's certainly going to be useful in preparing it for the foundation of that which is to come. As the plowman turns the soil of his field and harrows it, and so brings that which is underneath to eventual fruition, so a similar process is taking place in the world today, and all is preparatory for the sowing and its resultant effects. Hence the rays of the Jews, as here given, are important. Now, usually first ray and third ray are given, but in this list, the magical third ray and seventh ray are given. He tells us that in general, the third ray rules magic and the seventh ray rules ritual. Of course, seventh ray is broadly associated with magic as well. These effects will constitute the new Aquarian culture and civilization. It will be a spiritual, spiritual materiality, or a spiritual approach to matter. In this process, let me get that another little dot in there, maybe that'll help. Yeah, in this process, the hierarchy is taking a definite and influential part and is working more uniquely and specifically than ever before in the history of the world under instruction and vital aid from Shambhala. So he's asking us, do we fully understand this? Do we really understand this? I wonder whether you can grasp the implications of this paragraph, maybe to an extent, maybe not much. But anyway, it seems that the Jewish group is involved in preparing this foundation. And that at a certain point, much of the problem will be lifted. Certain realizations and decisions, and then later the problem will be somehow lifted away. So the dark group keeps the focus upon the material form, and the Jewish intelligence is helping to prepare that form. Okay. Cleavages between that which is matter form and that which is love wisdom is the study of these cleavages is being produced by the influence of the Jews. Certain syntheses of understanding, I imagine, or in how to handle matter, and certain realizations and decisions are coming in under their influence. But it will not exactly stay that way when the mind aspect is more fully developed. When the focus of the effort of the dark, then the focus of the effort of the dark forces will change, and the problem of the Jews focused through this separative energy of the third ray and first ray, and to a certain extent the sectarian nature of the seventh ray will disappear. But right now the Jews are helping humanity that does not handle its problems intelligently, handle them intelligently. Okay, so do we understand it? Well, let's ponder on this. So here we have I've been, searching for this particular tabulation for quite a while, and it's right under my nose, really. Again, the Shambhala energy associated, of course, with the planetary head center in the first ray, obviously. The divine purpose is there, conditioning the life of nations. It is determining. The plan appears in response to this divine purpose. The normal expressions would be Sanat Kumara as Lord of Shambhala, politics in general, esotericism. And it says it's the new, I suppose, Uranus coming in there as the major first-ray monadic planet, and it's the destroyer, destroying that which is not archetypal. But esotericism, interesting that it is associated with the first ray in Shambhala. Interesting that esotericism is associated with the first ray and Shambhala. Okay, well, I'm not going to succeed here certainly not in, I'm not going to succeed in aligning all of this, not going to work for me. But do the best I can. All right, hierarchical energy. It is, in general, the planetary heart center. I suppose is it the heart center of the planetary logos? I would say so. And its energy is mainly the second ray, and its love wisdom is distributed. The Buddha and the Christ are particularly associated. What comes through it is divine love wisdom. You know what? I think if we went over here to page 89 of the externalization of the hierarchy, we might get something a little more orderly. Yeah, sure enough. Yeah, there it is. And, it's put in the right order, and you can see clearly. So the hierarchical energy is there, and in general, divine love, wisdom, the Buddha and the Christ are the expressions within the planetary logos. It's the planetary heart, and there are two heart centers, as we've just been told, one within the head and one between the shoulder blades, the Buddha and the Christ representing them respectively. The planetary heart center conditioning the soul, conditioning consciousness, and the religious life and spiritual life of the nations. It's not only about the new, it is inspiring. And I wonder about this permanence. Maybe it's because the second ray soul of our planetary logos and the second ray soul of our solar logos. It's a building force. Now we go on. Yeah, I can't make it line up perfectly. Humanity's energy is divine intelligence. Notice always the word divine. It has to do at least with the higher two planes of any sevenfold planar system, the monadic and logoic, and the expression through many people today. It's the planetary throat center. Sometimes, it's associated with the asthma center, sometimes with the solar plexus, but in general, I think we are on safe grounds when we call it the planetary throat center. It conditions the mind, and we're involved with education. So the will to evolve is the third one of the one of the third aspects of the will. There are seven aspects, will to initiate, will to unify, will to evolve, will to harmonize, will to act, will to cause, and what's that last one? Okay, organize, I guess, will to organize. And the third aspect of that sevenfold expression of the will is the will to evolve, which has to do with education. Okay. Sometimes we're told that education, especially along the wisdom line, is of the second ray, and sometimes that the great systems of education involve the third and the fifth rays. It is creative, the ray of creative intelligence. Okay. Now, the next one, he puts the Jewish force in the fourth position. It is temporary, and I guess it's just helping humanity become more intelligent from a certain perspective. Temporary, and I'm going to make the columns not work well. Helps with the intelligence of humanity. So this conditions. Well, there's just no hope. I'm not going to hope for too much here. It's just not going to work. Yeah. Anyway, conditions world emotion, and it has to do with sensitivity, and it's the seventh aspect of the third ray, not just the seventh ray by itself, but the seventh aspect of the third ray. So in a way, the Jewish force is sort of a ray 1 soul, ray 3 personality in its seventh aspect. That's something worth remembering, because sometimes I've said third and seventh ray. Something of the seventh ray will come in there, of course. This is this is such a mess, but excuse me. Seventh ray? No, not really. Magic and money are involved here, so sort of the seventh aspect of the third ray. Magic and money. A lot of the financial reorganization that's going on is done under the first degree initiates on the seventh ray. They will come in and revise the economic setup. It seems that I would really like to I wonder if I made all of this smaller, how it would look, and Or am I just getting myself in trouble? Um, well, you know what page to turn to. Is page 89 in this book, and we can get a more correctly columned presentation. Now, finally, we have the materialistic forces. In general, the planetary sacral center. I think I will read off of the book itself. So it's the matter aspect altogether, and form is not matter. We have to realize that. The planetary sacral center in general is involved, and it conditions substance, however substance is meant here. Usually it's that which underlies some kind of more um, dense formulation. It's the fifth ray aspect of the first ray. So the first ray again is found, it's a counterpoise to the first ray of Shambhala. And generation is involved, generation into dense form, and mind or mahat is the way to go with this. So that is understood. Okay. And I think I've been guilty of saying first and fifth rays. Well, you can see how the fifth ray would be involved under the law of cleavages and the density of the form. And, one of the disciples was told, look, you might have a fifth ray brain in your next life. That would be really difficult for you because it would be dangerous for the occultist. Right. Well, okay, I've done a little housekeeping here and I think managed to make things look a little, shrinking the size, making things look a little better, and producing separation, sensitivity, seventh aspect of the third ray, magic, money. Mind is different from intellect. Interesting that the third ray is associated with intellect per se, which maybe involves involving some aspect of the intuition, perhaps, and mind, more the concrete mind. So what I've done here, number 4, sensitivity is third conditioning, world emotion. World emotion, sensitivity is there. Reducing separation. Okay, that's pretty good. So basically I've made some slightly better graphs or tabulations. Not as good as found as in the book, for sure. But we are at the end of this particular program, and I'm sorry for the misalignment here of things. I think one of the things that I should do is get rid of, I see what I've done. There's one, and this is a better chart, and also a still better chart. So I'll get rid of this first one, and just noting that the temporary application of the Jewish force is helping with the intellect of humanity. I'll just say that. The Jewish force helps with the intellect of humanity until that emphasis is no longer needed. It's part of the transition, it's part of the bridging aspect. And then there will be a different emphasis, and the Jewish problem will be lifted to the heart and solved in a humanitarian manner, and there will be, in fact, an altogether better situation within humanity and much less separatism, and much of this has to be accomplished during the Aquarian Age. Okay, well, we've done about 11 pages, something like that. Not a lot. but he really is emphasizing these 5 types of force and how they impact forms of different types, according to the refinement and the sensitivity of the form. So will be the response, so will be the reaction, and more deliberately, the response. Even though we're dealing with 1939 here and the onset of the Second World War, we can say it really began on September 1st. Even though that is the case, we're still being told so much which is of immediate application now. So I'll send this to you, and hopefully you'll be able to derive something from it. There's just so much to learn. I mean, the mind of Master DK is just vast and synthetic and full of meticulous entirety. He can't even convey to us not a tiny portion of what is in his mind, but at least it's enough to lift us out of our customary limitations, our customary mental limitations. So that's that, and we'll go on and work further ahead with program number 8, program 7, a long one, 3 hours, and filled with important studies. In other words, I may emphasize certain things, but as you go through it, you'll see other things. You just stop the progress of the video and focus on those things according to your understanding and what is important to you. Okay, lots of love and goodwill and all good things to everybody as we go on assimilating and preparing for the next teaching, bridging towards the next teaching, the 3rd installment, which is coming. Bye-bye.